and welcome to the first session in the third series of American English Live Teacher Development. My name is Lauren, and I'll be with you today along with my colleagues behind the scenes, moderator Amy and moderator Heather, who will be serving as moderators to help answer your questions and respond to your comments during the session. Today, Kate will be talking with Annalise Hausler-Akpovi about service learning as a teaching strategy that promotes meaningful experiential learning. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session in our third series of American English Live for Teacher Development. We're so glad to have you all here. Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction, and let's go ahead and get started. So as Lauren said, I'm Kate and I work here in Washington, D.C. at the Office of English Language Programs, and I'm part of the American English social media team. I'm happy, of course, to be your facilitator and host today, and so happy to see all of you here. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to our first-time viewers and are also very happy to see those of you who have attended previous events. It's great to be with you all. So let's start with these American English Live viewing group photos featuring teachers at the Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar in Sucre, Bolivia. Special thank you to Gonzalo Berdicio and his viewing group for sharing these. We love to see teachers learning and sharing ideas as they view the American English Live series. So thank you for sending these. And to everyone else out there, we certainly hope that we receive some of your photos. So please share them by emailing americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org or by sharing them on social media with using @AmericanEnglishForEducators. We'll be able to see them and then maybe we will share them in the next session. So let's take a look at this exciting lineup we have for this series. Our presentations for this series are on the topics of service learning in the language classroom, professional development for teacher trainers, and strategies for teaching in multi-level classrooms. Today, our first session is about empowering students to solve local problems, adapting materials with service learning. So we're going to share more details about the next session after the end of this session, so stay tuned. So here's a little bit about what to expect. Each session is approximately 60 minutes long and is usually linked to a Teacher's Corner theme on the American English website. Resources related to this event will be available on the website in just a few days. The presenter will present the material and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments as well. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience. We want to know what comments, ideas, questions you have. So please do share your thoughts using the comments feature or the chat box. When our session comes to a close in about an hour, you will have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the session, we'll share a link in the comments and at the top of this post. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about this session. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly in order to receive your digital badge. And we'll leave this link open until Monday, September 10th. So if you don't have a chance to watch the entire session, you can watch it, you can review it. It'll stay right here on our page. You can review it and take the quiz later. And if you have a colleague or friend who you think might be interested, you can share this with them as well, and they can watch and take the quiz later. Don't worry, the quiz is not too difficult. If you're able to join us and view the entire session, you should have no trouble completing it successfully. Speaking of digital badges, we thought it was great to see some of you proudly sharing the badges you earned earlier in previous series on social media. Feel free to share your digital badge by posting it on your accounts and tagging American English for Educators. We look forward to seeing those reflections of your professional development online soon. And we are very pleased to announce that registration for the Professional Development for Teacher Trainers MOOC, or Massive Open Online course, will begin on September 10th. So you can start registering on September 10th. And as you can see here, the course begins in October. So This MOOC, or Massive Open Online Course, is designed for both new and experienced teachers, and it gives participants methods for creating, presenting, and evaluating effective teacher training workshops. You will gain tools and techniques for promoting and providing professional development in your teaching context. So I know that a lot of you who view our webinars and our Facebook Live events are leaders in your contexts. And you can develop some of those leadership and presentation skills by taking part in our 5-week Massive Open Online course, which starts in October. So be sure to register at www.aeeteacher.org/MOOC. We look forward to seeing lots of you attending that course. And now for today's session, empowering students to solve local problems, adapting materials with service learning. So today we will explore the concept of service learning as a teaching strategy that promotes learning through community service and reflective activities. We will also consider ways to use adapted materials in local contexts and examine regional real-world problems. And we'll also learn specific strategies and classroom activities that use the service learning framework to foster critical thinking, problem solving, and civic engagement. And now it's my pleasure today to introduce Annalise Hausler-Akpovi. Annalise started her career as a Peace Corps volunteer and English language fellow in Benin, West Africa. She's been a full-time professor at Modesto Junior College since returning to the United States. Her interests include theme-based instruction focusing on social justice and innovative pedagogies including service learning, learning communities, and the first-year experience. Annalise completed her undergraduate degree in comparative literature and French at the University of California and Berkeley, and her master's degree is in English with an emphasis in TESOL from San Francisco State University. So welcome, Annalise.
Hi, nice to be with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, great to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us and for sharing about this exciting topic with us today.
Yes, I'm very pleased to be able to talk about this idea of empowering students to really solve local problems and to adapt materials and really embrace the idea of service learning. So thank you for participating, and I'm eager to get started. So I'd like to start today with some questions for you to ponder. I think it's important as we move through the presentation to really think about some key topics and key aspects of this idea of service learning. So the first question is, why should teachers empower their students to solve local problems? This is a really important question. Why should we feel that this is part of our scope of professional activity? Another question, how can English language teachers adapt material to help students address problems in their community? So here in the English language classroom, we are adapting materials, we want to solve problems. How can that be done? The third question is really sort of at the heart of this presentation. What is service learning, and how can it promote problem solving, civic engagement, all of these things in the classroom? And lastly, of course, how can we incorporate language learning activities into our service learning projects? So with that said, I want to move to a question that I would like to hear your feedback from. What is service learning? And on the next slide, really, what do you already know about it? Have you heard of it before? So let's hear from you all. And what do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I would love to hear from you, our participants out there. How would you define service learning? Have you ever heard of service learning before? And what do you already know about service learning? So we would love to hear from you, our participants, on your ideas. And as we are looking and waiting for your wonderful responses, for me, service learning is something that I always saw in a US context, was that service projects were actually a requirement for graduating. And so some of my students had to participate in a certain number of community service hours before they graduated. Is that anything like what we're talking about today, Annalise?
Well, that's a very good point. There is a big difference between community service and service learning. And it'll become clear as we move through the presentation, but the learning is a key part that's different from just community service.
Got you. Yeah, we're seeing some really great responses. Noreen Kanwal says that it's about bettering the society. Arno Paul says that it's about providing help to others in the community. And Aisha Adil says that service learning is a pragmatic and holistic approach towards learning and community development. Whoa, that sounded like a very good definition. And Zu Felil says that it's something that we can do to help others in need. So lots of different ideas out there. And I think, Annalise, the audience already has some really insightful thoughts and ideas about this, but I think maybe you're going to help us hone it in a little bit on the learning aspect as well. Am I right?
I hope so. I hope so.
Great.
So I want to move forward and look at some of the ideas about service learning. At the base of service learning, it's a form of experiential education, and it really allows students to learn by doing. So in the little picture, you see how this little image is learning. Of course, you learn by reading, but you really also learn a lot by doing. It's very hands-on. In the next little piece here on this slide, you'll see a learning pyramid. And from this pyramid, there is this argument that, of course, we learn by lecture and reading and audio-visual, which is what we're doing now, but there's a bigger piece, a bigger impact with student retention of information, with discussing, practicing, and teaching. So all of these things are part of that learning in the service mode, service learning. And in the next slide, I'd like to actually show you one of two definitions. And I think it's good to start with the definition. So here, service learning is a form of experiential education, which we just talked about, where learning occurs through a cycle. It's a cycle of action and reflection as students seek to achieve real objectives for the community, very important in the community, and also deepen their understanding and their skills themselves. So you have these two parts. You have the community activity, and then you have the learning that takes place in the classroom. And I think it's important to emphasize those two parts. And it distinguishes service learning from community service.
Great. And one of my other favorite words on this page here is that word reflection. I feel that that's a really important part if we're going to ask our students to think critically about service learning. The reflection piece is one of the most important pieces, and maybe a piece where we can ask our students to develop their language skills as well.
Good point, Kate. Thank you. In the next slide, we have another definition that reiterates what we had in the first, but expands it a little bit. And we're going to talk about this definition. This is the National Service Learning Clearinghouse definition. So you'll see this frequently. If you just Google, you'll see this online. Service learning is a teaching and learning strategy that integrates meaningful community service with instruction to achieve three different things: enrich the learning experience, teach civic responsibility, and also to strengthen your community or the student's community. These are really important pieces. So with this in mind, I'd like to move to the next slide and ask a key question here. How can we, as language teachers, incorporate language development activities into our service learning? And what are some language activities that your students could do as part of a service learning project? So this is something to start thinking about from the very beginning as we examine service learning. Any thoughts from the participants?
Yeah, participants, what do you think? How can we incorporate language development activities into service learning? We'd love to see some of your ideas. I know from our previous session that we had earlier this morning here in Washington, D.C., we had a lot of people talking about reflection activities that they could do, such as even just labeling a garden that the students would work with. Or we had some ideas where some students actually created a video in English about the service learning that they did. So these are all really great ideas. Let's see, Sarah Noor says the students could maybe play word games. Maybe that would be a way to prepare. Nahid Ashbak says by giving them practical work, maybe by interviewing people or working at NGOs. Great idea. Maybe students can use what they learn in their classroom to reach out to different groups in the community. So these are some really great ideas, everyone. Really good ways to add some language development as well.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, service learning lends itself well to vocabulary, to conversation, to reading, to writing, to a lot of different language skills. So we're going to move on, and we're going to look together at this idea that service learning is a teaching and learning strategy. So in the next slide, you can see the big issue here after this teaching and learning strategy is really how do we make clear that as teachers, it's our responsibility. So in this slide, you can see, the next one, you can see me doing a workshop, and I'm working with teachers explaining that service learning is a real technique. It's a method, it's an approach to teaching, and ultimately it's a real process. So students who participate in service learning need teachers to really understand the process of developing service learning. It's not just a field trip that you do once and then you come back and you have a little discussion about. It's a much more lengthy process. So you can see here the terms I use when I explain this. They'll fly in there, the technique or the practice or the approach, or really I want to emphasize the process to develop service learning. I think once you understand that it's not something that just comes together in one small afternoon, it's a process that the teachers really have to put some time into to develop so that it matches their curriculum and that it really enhances the students' learning. For this particular event, I was doing a workshop in Benin, in Pobe, Benin, and I was talking about service learning, and there were a lot of teachers who were very interested in trying service learning after this workshop. So I'm looking forward to hearing how it develops, this great instructional process in Benin.
Wonderful. And I'd also be really curious after this session to hear from ideas from our participants here as well about how they're able to implement the strategies we're talking about today.
Okay, thank you. So if we move on, you'll see, I just want to emphasize in the next slide that as I said, it's really important to be carefully planned by the teacher and then also to develop relationships with community partners. The community partners are the places where the students can potentially do service. So this planning process is key. Okay, the next thing I want to point out about service learning is that service learning, it also integrates very meaningful community service. So this idea of a field trip to go and look at something, that's not service learning. It really means you have to do something that contributes to the community. So I'd like to ask our participants again, another question. What are some examples from your own local context of community service that maybe you could do with your students? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, participants, we'd love to hear what are some things that you could do with your students that might help your communities. And I have a question for you, Annalise. What's the difference between meaningful community service and regular community service?
That's a really important thing to point out. I think meaningful community service meets a need in the community. I think meaningful community service is not just someone imposing their idea of what someone else needs. Analyze and you hear from organizations that we need this help or we need this job done, as opposed to a teacher just thinking maybe something needs to be done without really understanding the context. So that's important.
Great. Yeah. So it involves some research and maybe some asking of questions for people in the community in terms of what would be really helpful. Looks like we have some people, Banish says spending time and teaching at orphanages. Amina says maybe a cleanliness drive. Let's see. A lot of people talking about ways to help clean up the environment or projects related to recycling, things like this. Excellent.
Great idea. So the next slide just lists a few of these ideas, and some of you have mentioned them. So picking up trash, I think was that Amina who said that, a cleanliness drive, planting trees. This is a really important activity. Working in local community organizations to meet needs, and this is important, needs that they identify. Organizing health awareness or environmental awareness campaigns. This is a really dynamic opportunity for students to participate in building awareness. Something as simple as assisting the elderly around the house or in a community home. And then one of my personal favorites as an English language teacher is having older students who are studying English help younger students at school or in after-school programs or even in English clubs. I think that's a really great opportunity for language practice, and it's very meaningful service.
Yeah, and I like that one a lot because it's sort of a combination of those bottom two on that pyramid that you showed us, practicing by doing and teaching others. So I really like that one.
Good point, thank you. So in the definition, we talk about service learning. It requires that we approach the activity and we try to find meaningful community service. In the next slide, you'll see another really important piece is that you have this instruction and reflection. And so I want to ask you, as you think about what kind of instruction you could match with your community service ideas, what kind of reflection activities could you match? I want to ask you what types of questions. In the next slide, would you ask your students to consider if they're participating in service learning? So what would you think students should think about? What would you think students should be pondering and mulling over as they participate? Any thoughts?
That's great. Yeah. So as we're learning more and more as we go through this presentation, reflection is one of the most important aspects of service learning and can be one of the key components for critical thinking and language development. So what questions would you ask students to consider? Let's see, I'm seeing Laura says she would ask her students to think about what are the community needs. Great one. Let's see. Things like maybe if they think of an idea, let's see, Shazad says, maybe you're thinking, let's plant some trees. Well, why should we do this? What are some of the key benefits for something like this? Maybe asking the participants to think about how they can prepare. What are the goals of our mission? Great question. And maybe think about the characteristics of the people they are working with. That one is from Arno Paul Stufkens. Excellent, excellent ideas. Keep those questions coming as we continue through the presentation.
Yes, I appreciate your input, participants. I think you're right on track. The next slide actually elaborates some of the things that you've noted. The first idea is asking what questions about the facts and the events in the experience, and to have students talk about the service activity in a very objective way. What did they do? How did it work? The next sort of segment of questioning is the so what question. And that's really for students to analyze the experience. What did it really do? What did they really do? What was the impact of the experience? And a lot of the so what and the analysis also includes personal reflection. And then lastly, in this sequence of reflection and instruction is the now what, and consider the future impact of the experience on the student and the community. So kind of looking forward, looking at the ripple effect of the service. In the next slide, I want to point out that something really important to note is that service learning as a classroom activity and approach can be adapted for all levels of English language learner. It can also work with different class sizes. So in general, English language teachers have the opportunity to use community service activities in the context of service learning with beginning level students, and they can use the very early language development skills to give assignments and match their course content and their curriculum. And basically what the instructors are doing is they're looking at their curriculum, they're looking at the body of their course content and matching it to service activities. So if they're teaching vocabulary, if they're teaching beginning conversation skills, find a service activity that matches that particular theme. Also in large classes, it works very well because just like in multi-level or beginning level, you can really find instruction activities that are appropriate for a large class and service activities as well. So I think it's really important that service learning can be adapted for different language levels. It can be adapted for different class sizes. It's a dynamic and a really fabulous way to get students engaged as learners. Wanted to point that out.
That's great. Thank you so much for pointing that out. I think that's a really good point. And I know a lot of people are asking questions about that probably in their minds. How can I adapt this for my context? And that's one of the great things about the service learning technique or strategy is that there are so many different things that you can do with this technique. And there are so many ways that you can make it your own, that you can take aspects and components and use it to really fit where you are. Lower level students might be able to just reflect on what they did, the first question that you had, and maybe have more simple vocabulary. Higher level students might do more of a presentation or a longer essay. Larger classes might go into groups and do the project in smaller groups. So there are just so many ways that you, our participants, can be creative and adapt these wonderful strategies for your context.
I just thought of one thing I'd like to note, that a really inquisitive instructor in Benin this summer suggested that he could partner his English language class with a biology class as they were exploring this idea of environmental cleanup. So there are also other opportunities that I don't mention here. Really, the sky's the limit. So this is just an introduction, but I encourage you to really explore the possibilities as instructors.
Great, thanks.
The next slide has some important sample reflection questions and sentence starters. I think instructors always appreciate having some things already prepared, and you can use these as a starting point. So some reflection questions. What is the impact of the service learning experience on your life? That's the student's life. What did you learn about solving problems because of doing service learning? Again, the students are reflecting about what they learned. And then lastly, as a sample question, how did your community change because of your volunteer work? So this is a starting point for some reflection questions. Another thing I always appreciate is sentence starters. And so here we have 3. By doing service learning, I, the student, now understand. And so it's open-ended. Second one, I see that service learning benefits my community because, and again, there's no wrong answer. The students can all contribute. And lastly, working to solve community problems together is a good idea because. So some handy sentence starters here and questions all ready to kind of get the students' ideas flowing.
I love sentence starters, and I think these are great ways to adapt the activities and the reflection for your level of students. And I just want to remind everybody that these resources will be on our website, americanenglish.state.gov, and on the NING, americanenglishwebinars.com, after this presentation. So you can take a look at these sentence starters, or maybe even come up with some of your own to help your students to reflect.
So thank you, Kate. As we move forward here, I want to give you another list of just some examples of instruction and reflection activities. Again, you have a lot of possibilities, group discussions, creative projects, certainly journals. A lot of students really enjoy writing in journals, multimedia class presentations, reports and essays that could really match whatever curriculum, whatever learning objectives you already have in your curriculum. Videos and blogs if your students have access to technology. Community events, again, those health campaigns, environmental awareness campaigns, certainly case studies. And I think that service learning has a great opportunity to offer students reflective reading and really to get them building their reading fluency by reading about their topic that they're doing service about. So this is just a short list of possible activities for instruction and reflection. I think that the participants already offered some of these ideas for activities. Anything you want to add there, Kate?
No, we actually had a great question from Zaida Saida. And I think this is a good place to ask this question. How can students progress be assessed in such activities? What do you do to do assessment for these activities, Annalise?
That's a very appropriate question. As English language instructors, I think we're always very concerned about measuring the students' progress and assessing what students are learning. So in any of these activities, in the way that I would normally assess a journal or the way I would normally assess a group discussion, I would use a rubric, I would have criteria. And I think the only difference is that my content focus is shifted to service and the service activity as opposed to the reading for the day or the theme for the day. So I think it's really important to underline the fact that service is not just a fun activity with some reflection questions. It's not just fluff. It is a serious learning approach where you measure, you assess, and ideally you want to see your students moving forward in their language acquisition and having success in building their fluency.
Great, thank you. And we had actually the same person who asked that question, Zaida Saida, says maybe survey-based reports would be an interesting reflection activity. Great idea.
I agree. So I think Zaida has already anticipated our next slide. Ultimately, service learning is designed to enrich the learning experience. And that means that we want to be able to measure and demonstrate that students are learning. In the next slide, my question for you is just how does service learning benefit students? I think that's a key question. If you examine using service learning, you have to have an idea, you have to have a clear understanding of how does it benefit students. Any thoughts about that, participants?
What do you guys think? What do you think? How does service learning benefit ideas? What do you think are some things that ways students can benefit if they take place in service learning activities? It says that, Sarah says that it encourages critical thinking. Let's see, what else? These are, Zu Felil says that these are genuine and authentic tasks, which is always important for our students. You know, one of the key factors of English as a foreign language is to make sure that we are able to motivate our students, especially if there are not a lot of, if English is spoken only in the classroom. So these are genuine and authentic tasks. That's a great point that might help motivate our students. Alexandra says that it will make them more involved in the community. Lots of ideas about increasing critical and creative thinking. Great, excellent. Thanks, everyone. Great ideas.
Thank you. And I have a participant on Facebook wrote, Alex Radney, that he had done service learning with his students 2 years ago. He and his students visited some schools and they shared ways to learn English. And they also brought Voice of America materials, some books and calendars and other materials. So I think that there are lots of people who are already trying service, and I think it's a very dynamic approach. And I encourage you all, the participants, to really consider it.
That's great. And I have to mention just a couple more because they're such wonderful comments. We have a lot of people talking about how this helps develop a sense of social responsibility. Noreen said that, and that Kurtalain Hussein says that service learning is a great way to create empathy. And I think those are excellent and very insightful ideas about this. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent goals as educators and as citizens. And the next slide really talks about how service learning, it has another benefit. It teaches civic responsibility. It helps students become aware of the needs in their community. And ultimately, this idea of civic responsibility, students become productive, responsible, caring, contributing members of society. And I think we all want that for students in every context, in every country. This is really important. So I'd like to say that this is one of the benefits that I believe is one of the key benefits of service learning. So,
yeah, and I think a lot of our participants would definitely agree with you just from seeing all their great comments about making them more sensitive about their communities, thinking about analyzing situations and finding solutions to problems, becoming more responsible. So a lot of people are agreeing with you, Annalise.
Good. That's nice to hear. And the last point I want to make that was from the definition is that if you do the work in the community and you become civically engaged, then ultimately your community is strengthened. And what a powerful idea for our students to become civically responsible and to actually be participants in strengthening their own communities. So I think this is a fabulous piece to examine as well. And on the next slide, I want to point out that we have a 1-minute clip. This is a short YouTube clip, and it's again from the group Learn and Serve America, and it elaborates on the definition and also talks more about the benefits. So please enjoy.
Service learning is, it gives you this opportunity to go out into the world and do things hands-on.
You know, it's that moment where the light bulb comes on and everything kind of connects. This is the most important initiative that we have at the school.
Service learning is a teaching strategy. It's a tool. It helps educators become better teachers.
Service learning is a teaching method that links community service to the classroom. Students work together on community service projects that help teach everything from science and math to writing and history.
When children are engaged in service learning projects, it helps to tie the basic components of academics with real-life experiences.
These projects meet real needs in the community, and research shows that service learning engages students, improves critical thinking, and teaches the importance of teamwork and communication.
So it actually takes the learning kids are doing in school and their body of knowledge and their ability to think analytically and to apply that to a problem in the community.
By engaging students in the world beyond the classroom, service learning opens new doors and brings learning to life.
Great video. Thanks for sharing.
Yes, I particularly like the fact that it highlights the enthusiasm of the educators, the teachers themselves, but also the administrators. And it shows this idea that it has a very broad impact beyond just students. From this point, I'd like to point out that this is a video that's set in the context of the United States. But I personally am very convinced that this kind of enthusiasm can be created and sustained in any country, in any context. So I want to highlight, this is not just an American approach. This is something that is beneficial and useful in any country, in any context, in any kind of a language learning environment.
Great.
So now we've looked at the definition of service learning. I want to move and kind of shift gears. I want to look at this idea that English language teachers can use service learning. And the question is, how can you adapt the materials for your own local context, for your own environment, to address problems that you have? And I feel like this is a good spot to pause and ask, how can this all be kind of approached from a more regional or local context for our participants?
So what do you think, participants? Maybe what are some ways that you can use service learning to solve or help to solve or address some local problems? We'd love to hear from you. We're seeing so many really positive comments about how great this session is. Muyad says that we bring the variety of our work to the society and to the class. Carlos says we might be able to help those who are in need. Ramiz says they could do surveying local problems. Lots of really great ideas.
Thank you for your contributions. So as we talk about this concept, it's an alluring idea. It's a fabulous idea, but I want to now look a little more closely and look kind of at this idea of the teacher making a plan. And on the next slide, you'll see kind of a step-by-step approach that shows the 4 big areas to consider as you decide to do service learning, kind of a project checklist. So of course, there's the first idea of preparing and planning. And that's a very big piece because the planning is key. Finding the partners, identifying the problems, meeting the need, all of that is a huge amount of time to prepare initially. The second piece is the actual volunteer service activity. Once you've done the planning, then you go with your students, you do the activity. And this third piece is is the work you've done in the planning, and that is all of the assignments, the reflection, the application, the assessment. So you've planned it, you've prepared it, you've matched your curriculum, and hopefully that third stage works really beautifully because you've already done the work. One piece I want to point out in that fourth checkbox there is evaluation and recognition. This is something that a participant already noted. You really need to assess the student's learning. How well did the curriculum objectives get met as the students were doing the service? And if you do the evaluation and you find areas to improve, that's an excellent opportunity also for teachers to reflect and see where they can improve the process, the learning process. And then lastly, I think it's important to recognize what the students do, the recognition, the partners that you recognize in the community. So this is a large cycle of planning and implementation and all the way to the end of evaluation and recognition. All of these steps are really important. And in the next slide, we're going to look at an example.
Great. So I think one key thing that I've been hearing is that this technique, service learning, is a process and it needs to be planned. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just something we can quickly do, although there are little aspects that we might be able to make into shorter activities or things like that in the classroom. But having really meaningful engagement with your community and inspiring your students to learn and think critically is definitely a process. And we have one really insightful comment from Gulnoor Sahin, who says that maybe some of the planning can be done by students or students can be involved in it.
Absolutely.
Is that a good one?
Absolutely. I think the more the students own their learning, their planning, the more they're engaged. Absolutely.
Great.
So one thing about the planning is I think you get out of it what you put in it, which means the more you plan, the more step by step you've addressed each of these planning phases, the better the result is. This example I want to share with you is a really powerful example. It's from Benin, West Africa. And this was brought to me by Mr. Hilarion Vegba, who is an English teacher and a high school principal in his town. He's a former Humphreys fellow at Vanderbilt University. And he had this idea. He suggested using the environment theme that came out of the textbook, the required textbook, and the required curriculum for the senior year, the final year of high school, and that was the environment theme. And he had fabulous ideas that he developed, and I'd like to share some of these with you. The first idea here is to identify a local problem. And on the next slide, you can see one of the big issues in that area is desertification. It's caused from trees being cut down to make charcoal. Charcoal is sold, it's a big industry, and then it's burned. It's used as cooking fuel to cook food. And so this is an issue that the students are familiar with, and he was able to use the materials and the theme from the text. He adapted from the regular English language course book, the curriculum about the environment, and he added things, discussion, vocabulary activities. Students at that level were doing research about local tree, the desertification and the environmental situation. All of these things came from the curriculum. In addition, on the next slide, you can see this example of finding an expert who can share information about the issue, this local problem, desertification, the trees being cut, the charcoal production, and also sharing information about alternative cooking methods. So again, materials, adapted, themes being pulled in. In terms of the actual service, lots of opportunities here, visiting the tree nursery operated by the forestry department, learning more about the issue from the actual experts, the foresters, and then actually doing some work, helping to take care of the trees, watering the tree seedlings, and then a really great idea, growing seedlings and planting them where needed. So ultimately, you can see this whole plan of the curriculum from the text from the class, and then the add-ons. In the next slide, you also see this idea that all of this could be expanded. So here, some additional instruction and reflection ideas, doing a writing assignment about the activity and its benefits. So writing about the issue, making posters to illustrate the tree cutting and desertification problem, showing some solutions, critical thinking, problem solving, and then lastly, group presentations about the activity, and then going to classes where younger students are learning English and presenting. So again, we have this opportunity for students to teach other students, students to talk with other students. All of these are just the tip of the iceberg with a topic, with a theme that any instructor can develop. And these are great examples from Mr. Vegba.
Wonderful. This is such an excellent example. And I've got to say, it looks like Mr. Vegba really followed this process to a T. I mean, he found the curriculum, he connected it directly to a local problem. He had students involved in an activity, and then he had them reflect. This sounds like he must have attended a presentation by you.
I think because he was a Humphreys Fellow,
yes.
This is not the only curriculum piece he adapted. He shared others. So I feel like he demonstrated that clearly in any country context, there is possibility. There are many possibilities. It just takes some creative approaches. And I think it takes, of course, this time, this process to develop.
Wonderful. And I was also wondering, so you've talked about, this is obviously in a very local context. And you talked about how you could adapt this for large classes or multi-level classes. We had a question from a couple of people about younger learners, and then also one from Abdullah Laghari about if older people or if elderly folks could be engaged in these types of activities. What do you think?
What a fabulous idea to have a multi-age learning environment where the older people, sometimes retired people have free time, could come in and work hand in hand, side by side with the younger learners. I feel like there's such potential with service learning to really engage the whole community, the school children and the people who live in the community to partner together. Really great idea.
Awesome. And one other quick question from Aline Danieli. What about if students cannot leave their building, the school building? Are there things that students could do in the classroom that would be related to service learning?
Well, I think that there are certainly community service activities that are very much concentrated within the school. And as you can see, this last bullet point here, students can create learning opportunities and share with other students. So environmental awareness campaign, a health campaign, maybe they can't go out into the community and do something, but they could do it within the context of their own school.
Oh, great idea. That's a good one. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I think it's
like, wow, that's a good one.
Yeah. So
Great.
if we move forward here, I just want to kind of really underline or highlight in the next slide the three big areas to consider as an English language teacher. Thinking about first how to adapt materials and really pulling themes from the English language curriculum. So that's a key thing. Look at your curriculum, look at your text, see where you could find a theme that would be workable. Secondly, looking at your local environment. So is a partnership in the school? If you can't leave the school, is it in the neighborhood, the school grounds? Is it the town? Is it the region? So where can you find those partnerships in the local environment? And then certainly that idea that it's meaningful service, so you're addressing real world problems, issues in the community, areas that people in the community struggle with, so that it's not just a superficial problem that someone thinks needs to be addressed, but that you can really verify this is something that makes a difference. So these are important to consider.
Great.
So the next slide, we are looking at some additional steps here. And I like to really map them out so that they're very clear. And hopefully as you work through these steps, you will see the importance of breaking things apart and doing it step by step. So first, examine the topics. We've been talking about this from your curriculum, and then go through a whole brainstorm process. The brainstorm process certainly can be as an individual, with a community, a group of instructors, even with students, to find service activities that match topics, contact potential community organizations. This is a key that you're finding organizations that need help. And then the fourth one, which we've talked about from the beginning, this idea of a step-by-step plan for for the instruction piece, that classroom instruction piece that complements the volunteer service, the post-reflection, all of the assignments. Very important to not forget.
Great.
Any thoughts about all of those important pieces?
One thought that came to my mind was about number 3, contacting potential community organizations. Do you usually recommend that communication? So I'm thinking about their language development, but I guess if they're contacting potential community organizations, they're using their local language. Is that okay in the language classroom?
Yeah, this is a question that often comes up. The service itself is, particularly if it's outside of the classroom, will occur in the local language. If you go out to do something in the community, you're not going to necessarily assume that the people you're working with are going to speak English. So
right.
Contacting those organizations, yes, all in the local language. The English language instruction, acquisition, practice part occurs in the classroom.
Okay, thanks. That helps.
Okay, so in the next slides, we were just kind of reiterating, elaborating the ideas from this slide. And that first idea in the next slide is just, again, look at your themes, look at your textbooks, look at your supplemental materials, really dive deeply to find places where you could find topics in your curriculum that would lend themselves to service learning. In the following slide, you'll see the second idea of this continuation of this idea about the content themes or the language topics that you could use. And I wanted to pause here and ask if you already have some ideas you've been sharing, if you'd like to share some more from your own curriculum, from your own teaching environment.
Yeah, remember everyone that the teacher in Benin used the topic of the environment from his curriculum. What other themes from your curriculum or language topics that you like to share with your students could you could sort of lend themselves really well to a community project or a service learning project? Let's see. I am seeing, we did have one person from the previous session mention history, that maybe something related to history could be a good idea. Perhaps you're trying to develop some tourism or something like this in your local context, and your students could research some of the history so that they can share with people who might be coming to the communities. Let's see, what else? Health is from Nadina. Charo says he could teach grammar through this. Asma says pollution. A lot of things related to the environment. They could do something about newspaper, awareness of water conservation. These are all really wonderful, wonderful ideas. Great. Thanks for sharing, everyone. Oh, Annalise, I think maybe you muted.
I saw that. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Sorry, excuse me. On the next slide, we are also reiterating this idea of matching the service with the curriculum. Very important. We've been talking about this. And as we move forward, again, we have an idea here that you can brainstorm, but students can brainstorm. So here is a sample class brainstorming activity where in small groups, students can use large pieces of paper or even just the blackboard in groups, and they compile lists of local problems and solutions. And so this empowers students to take a look at the world around them, to think critically. What are some problems? What are some solutions? And even start to imagine partnerships and activities beyond just identifying problems and solutions, but also imagining how they could contribute. So having students become engaged in part of the planning process is a really important step.
Great.
So as we move on here, you'll see this idea of community organizations, contacting them, learning more about the needs. Certainly instructors can do this. I find a lot of times older students already have a great idea, many ideas about the services and the activities and the organizations around them. So you can also use students as a resource here to share organizations that they're familiar with. So now in the next slide, if you notice, we have already talked about the importance of organizations and partnerships. So I want to see if you have some ideas about organizations in your community that you could partner with. We have some examples here, but let me hear from you.
Yeah, what are some possible organizations or types of organizations that you could partner with in your local context? There might be an after-school program that you could partner with. There might be a social center or a community gym or place where people practice sports. What are some places that you can go where you can find organizations or a group of people who might want to partner with you and your students and might even be able to give you some information on what their needs are?
We have
maybe a refugee organization. There might be a community center. That one is from Sabir.
Okay, great.
Shahzad says the Department of Forest and Wildlife or the Department of Water and Irrigation. Great ideas. Great ideas, everyone. Thanks for sharing.
Yes, thank you. So once you've worked through these sort of identifying problems, identifying organizations, identifying activities, you can see the next slide really highlights, of course, this plan, this step-by-step plan for instruction. And then on the next slide, the idea is all of that is framed by the assignments that you develop, the post-service reflection, and all of the things that really help the students to deepen their awareness of the issue and make this volunteer activity something that motivates them to continue the learning process, that motivates them to feel like they're part of the learning process. And I feel like those are really key components as you develop your plan. So ultimately, the next slide asks this big question: how does service learning empower students? And we started with this question: how can teachers get students involved in the process? Any thoughts from our participants?
How does service learning empower students, and how can you get your students involved in this process, everyone? What are some ways that you think service learning helps benefit students or to empower them? What do you think? Looks like some people are saying students see themselves as leaders in the community. That's a really good point. They might be more connected to other community organizations, and that might help them to have access to other resources that maybe they didn't know because they didn't know about that organization before. It helps in their decision-making skills because they're developing critical thinking skills. Enhances their confidence from Rahila. Enhances their problem-solving skills from Sher Afzal. We have so many wonderful answers. It looks like a lot of our participants agree that this can really be an empowering activity for our students.
So thank you for your thoughts. Let's move forward here and just underline again, this very important part of service learning is that civic engagement piece. And we had a participant who was looking on Ning, Mr. Alexander Gilam from Peru. He shared that students could create a conversation club for high school students and that they don't have to have extra money to do that they could participate in something that would make a difference with the teacher supporting with the classroom assignments. I thought that was a great idea, that this doesn't have to cost anything.
Wonderful.
So let's move forward. I want to show you this diagram here that really has an opportunity to look at different ways to get students involved in the service learning planning process, whether that's brainstorming at the top, the list of needs, researching the struggles in the community, surveying the local population, something that's often very successful, conducting interviews with experts, developing questions, creating their own list of organizations, service agencies. All of these things can be assignments. They can be activities that engage the student. I think it's really important to note that service learning is an approach where the students are actively involved.
Definitely. And these are just such great ways as well to develop their language skills. All of these ways that we're getting them involved are also ways that they can develop their language skills, which I really like.
And so the next slide shows a sort of a guide for English language instructors who are thinking about using service learning. So we've divided it into 3 different stages: the pre-service, the during service, and the post-service. So you can look in the pre-service stage, you're addressing local problems and possible solutions. So students and teachers could be brainstorming in that stage. You can see in the next slide, the column is filled in. And you could look at the English language curriculum component where you're introducing key terms and language concepts. In that 3rd line, you're finding community partners, and the students could also be compiling a list along with the instructor. Certainly the pre-service requires a lot of instruction planning for the instructor to make sure that all of the different aspects of the service project have something that the students do that's evaluated. And then reflection with the thoughtful work that the students do to really deepen their understanding. And then lastly, of course, designing the evaluation. So each of these next columns carries this process through. So you can look at each of the steps as they carry through. And there it is, the whole plan. This is a general plan that you can follow. I think that is by no means an exhaustive plan. So I encourage you to develop it further. But
absolutely. And as a reminder, these resources are on the Ning and will be on our website. So you can take a look at those then as well.
And as we conclude, I just want to point out some important questions for you to reflect on as English language teachers. So this first one is, how is service learning an effective strategy in the English language classroom? What do you think? I don't think we have time for answers, but okay. I want to point out that we have these reflection questions for you to consider. Some more questions here. How can service learning promote interaction? So this is talking about in the English language classroom. How can it connect to your curriculum? How does it compel teachers to become involved? That's another benefit. Teachers become involved. The next slide here, another big question, the strategies, the steps, the community partners. We've been talking about them throughout. So this is kind of questions to focus you at the end. And then the final question here that I really want to leave you with is, how does service learning provide a framework, a very critical framework, an important framework to foster critical thinking and problem solving and civic engagement? I think that is what I'd like to leave you with as participants. I do have one more quote actually at the end, the last slide. This is a quote by George Lucas, and he says, with project-based learning and service learning, students learn by designing and constructing actual solutions to real-life problems. So there is a high level of engagement and a high level of critical thinking. And I appreciate your participating with me. I really urge you to try service learning, and I love to see how this idea spreads throughout the globe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annalise. I love that final quote to end us with, and some really excellent questions for us to consider. Thank you so much for such an inspiring and engaging session on using the service learning framework to foster meaningful experiential learning. I think our audience really appreciated your suggestions, and I can see so many people in the comments excited about trying this in their classroom and thankful and inspired. So thank you so much, Annalise. This was a really wonderful, beneficial presentation for all of us.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, participants.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely want to thank you, our audience, for your